Hello and welcome to today's project. So what we're going to do today is this scene of a barn in snow. So here is one I have, as they say, already prepared, and I'm not totally happy with this. If I put the frame on it, I'm not quite sure if I should have this diagonal coming up here or not. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to have the diagonal coming the other way, and we'll see if that looks better. So you can see here I've done a sketch, and as usual I've outlined the sketch in a very dark pencil so that you can see it on the video. This is not what you're going to do on your watercolour paper. You want to draw it fairly lightly, because as we've already said, that if your pencil lines are very dark and you paint watercolour over the top of it, and then you want to delete the lines, it's going to be quite difficult. So I've only done this dark so you can see it. And here we've got the watercolour paper. As you see, have wet my paper and stapled it onto a board. Why do I do that? I do that because when the paper dries, it will shrink in a bit. You can see the corners here are turning up. That's where the paper has been pinned there and shrunk as it's dried. You can, however, just stick it on with normal masking tape. Make sure if you use masking tape, you go all the way around the edge, not just the four corners. And a note about masking tape, please be careful when you remove it again, and make sure you pull away from your painting, not towards the painting. If you've spent an hour doing your painting, you don't want to rip it up. So just quickly, we've got this shape that we're painting to, and as we've said before, this framed will go into a very nice standard frame. But why do I draw this frame to start out with? And when I paint, why do I say paint over the lines of your frame? And that's because, if we go back to our original, that's because if you paint over the edges, you've got a chance to change slightly your painting. So let's say, for instance, that's where my line is, but just say I wanted to move it slightly that way. Even half a centimetre can make a difference. So if you've painted over the edges, you've got a choice of where you're going to mat it, whereas if you paint and finish it exactly on the line, or even worse, inside the line, then you don't have so many choices. So let's press on. I've actually drawn my sketch out, so my sketch has been transferred from my sketch paper onto my watercolour paper, and the next stage we're going to do is think about colours. Now, I'm going to tell you the colours I've used for this one, but you know, you can use different colours if you want, but what we are going to do is mix them up on a piece of scrap paper before we start, just so we can figure out if we like the colours, because if you don't like the colours you've used on your painting, you probably aren't going to like your painting. So these are the colours that I've chosen for this painting, and the first one is a burnt sienna. Burnt sienna, a very old colour. It's a kind of a dirty red, and I class it as a red. Then we've got a dirty yellow. This one is actually yellow ochre, but you could also use raw sienna, also a very old colour. And the third one I've used is actually cerulean. Cerulean is a really bright turquoise, and be a little bit careful with it because it's a really, really violent colour. But mixed with these two colours, it'll knock it back and tone it down a bit. Cerulean is also an opaque colour. So usually raw sienna, burnt sienna, they're transparent colours. That means you'll see more of your paper through it when you put it on. So as I'd say, tread carefully. It's a fantastic colour, but you might want to test it on your paper before you start painting it on. It is very violent. So I'm going to put the colours now into my palette. If I can get the top off, yes. And you get yourself a piece of scrap paper, as I have here. Let's turn it over. And your big brush. And while you're testing the paper, you don't need a lot. So here you go, the blue. Now you see what I mean about a violet colour. Then you take a little bit of the yellow and you put it on halfway across. So you've still got a bit of blue, but you're putting in the yellow and mixing up into a green. And then a bit more of the yellow, bring it down here. And then we go into the third colour, which is the burnt sienna, and we add that to the yellow. So we've got some nice earthy tones there. And then just to finish it off, we go back to the blue. I mix up the blue. You should be able to see. You can get some with the burnt sienna and the cerulean. You'll get some really nice dark colours. So I try that for you again. Bit of that, and a bit of the red, and you can see you've got a really nice dark colour, which is the colour that we're going to use for the barn. Good, so that's what your scrap paper should look like, lots of colours all mixed in. So I'm going to pause the video now while I prepare for the next stage. Good, so you'll notice I've put the colours into the palette, and what we want to do first is we're going to have a yellowish background on our sky. Think about this, it's a winter's day, what we want is to have some blue in the sky, but there's going to be quite a lot of yellow in the sky as well. So I'm going to put a wash of a very pale yellow onto this area here. So what we do is we put clean water in the palette here, and then we mix up a little bit of the colour, and then very important, test it on the side of your paper. It has to be really pale. If it's too dark, so if it looks like this, that's too dark. So if you've got something like that, you need to add more water in until, I don't know, hope you can see this, it's a very pale yellow here. And what we're going to do then is we're going to wet the sky with clean water. Now I've got a layer of trees here, so you can paint over the trees, but try not to paint into the roof of your barn, because we really want that to be quite a straight line. So I've painted here, and how can you tell if it's wet? It's wet because when we hold it against the light, it's shiny. And then we're going to add some of this onto here. Painting into your trees, and I'm just going to lift my board up because I want it to run downwards. And you can see I've painted over on the right hand side, it's very pale, but I haven't got anything very much here on the left hand side. So what I want to do, that's the first layer, I'm quite happy with that. What I'm going to do now is to dry this section off, and then I'm going to paint in the blue. So we'll pause. Okay, good, it's now, this area is now dry, and you can see it's a very pale yellow. Now, why didn't I add the blue at the same time as the yellow? Well, you risk then getting a mixture of green in the middle there, and it maybe isn't what you want. So it's now completely dry, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this side, putting on the blue. But first I want to talk a little bit about the water. You can see this one is the one I've been washing my brush in. And what's a really good idea is to have two waters. So one you wash your brush in, and the second one is just clean your water, which you wash it in again, because if you've got any yellow still in your brush and you now go into the blue, you're automatically going to get a green, which is perhaps not what you want in the sky at this moment. So wash it out again, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing. Actually, now I notice I've splashed a bit of yellow into my blue part of the palette, so I'm going to just get rid of that. And again, we put the water in the palette, with the clean water, and then we mix up a bit of blue, and then we test it. Okay, that doesn't look too bad, but we can probably have a little bit more in here. And test it again, that's fine. Okay, washing it out with, and I'm going to put the clean water on this part here. And then I'm going to paint that blue, going over the edge of your, let's have a little bit here as well. Okay. Now you can see we've got a little line here. You might like that as a cloud, or if you don't want the line there, then wash out your water and just soften that edge so there's no line. Keep an eye on your, it's doing some strange and interesting things here. If you like it, leave it. If you don't like what it's doing, then tip up your board and move it around, and then you can scoop off the edge with a dry brush. Don't forget, when you dry it, it's going to dry lighter, so maybe add a little bit more of the blue in here. So I'm going to dry it again, and we'll see what the sky looks like then. Good, I'm not unhappy with that for the moment. It might be that I had a little bit more blue in this area here. As you can see, it's not quite dry because I've still got slight bulges in the paper, but that's going to be fine. So what we're going to do next is we're going to paint this line of trees in the background. And if we go back to my original, you can see that some of them are lighter and some of them are darker. So generally the lighter ones will go to the back. So I'm going to paint the light area now, and then we'll add the darker ones on later. What we also want to do at this stage is do make sure that you've got your line of your barn, the roof of the barn is quite straight. Buildings are more difficult to paint than trees or flowers because you have to get them right, and you have to get the perspective right on buildings. And I will do a course on perspective in the future, but if you want to know about perspective, have a look at the site. There is an article that tells you about perspective. So what we're going to do now is to mix up some bluey greens. And again, test them. The background's a little bit yellower than that. It's winter, so the trees, if there are any leaves on the trees, they're a sort of slightly dirty colour. So paint on the background. Notice it's not all the same colour. Let your brush dance across the paper. It'll still dry quite light, so don't worry about it too much. And here we go across the roof. If it's easier, you can turn the painting upside down, paint it the other way around, a little bit more blue in here. Don't paint the same colour all the way across. Blue, there's a bit of red. need some bits of fir trees so they're sticking up a bit. Good, that's fine. Pause. So we're going to continue on painting some darker trees. Again, go to the edge of the roof of your barn and then smudge. So you've got a light bit at the top and just paint that reasonably carefully so that you've got a nice wall and some nice tree trunks coming down here. And smudge it off here, and we'll do exactly. So you can see now we've got some trees that are at the back and they're lighter, and some trees that are at the front and they're darker. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Again, a straight bit across the top of your barn. Added a different colour in here. So we're building up this band of trees. And importantly, we don't need straight lines. This is a landscape, so we're not going to do straight lines. So good, that's worked well. And then we'll leave the rest for later, but now what I want to do is to paint in the barn. So if you can see, there's a shape that goes all the way around here. That is one shape. And what we're going to do is to paint that all together in one shape in slightly different colours. So I'm going to pause and dry this off now. I'm now going to paint the barn. Now I could paint it this way round, but I prefer to paint it this way round, and I hope you can see this shape here that I'm going to paint all in one go. And if you remember our original, which is here, you can see how dark this area here is. Now this is in painting what we call counter change. So we've got the really dark, so this tone 5, if you think of tone 1 as your lightest colour, which in this case is going to be your snow and your roof, and tone 3, 4, 5, which is your darkest colour, and here we've got the darkest colour next to the lightest colour. And why do we do that? It's because it stands out to our eye, so that is actually going to be the focal point of our composition. So we do need to make sure at this stage that we're going to have a dark colour. A bit more red. Okay. So paint this area. So you can already see that we want that nice line. Okay, so it doesn't all have to be the same colour and tone, so what I can do is wash off a bit and smudge off that bit at the bottom. Now I'm going to add a little bit more red, a little bit less blue. If you think the shadow is going to be darker underneath the roof, because although it's winter, we've still got the shadow, we've still got the light coming from the top, so the lightest bits are going to be here away from your roof. So let's make this a little bit light here. And I hope you can see that it's a lot bluer in this area here and redder in this area here. So we're going to have a lighter part here. And there's a little wall there. But you can see how I'm now getting a little bit lighter, so our eye should be going into this focus area here, instead of going quite so much into this area here. And I'm just going to add a little bit more blue on here, just so that it's got some different. And while we're here, there's a tiny bit here. It goes into that roof. Okay, so I turn it up the right way. You can see now that the snow has fallen on these roofs here, the snow has fallen on this roof, and we'll smudge that up a bit in the future. Okay, but you can also see that I've drawn my lines quite precisely. I've done it with a big brush. If you feel you need to go to a smaller brush, that's fine, but don't forget, as few brush strokes as you can manage. Don't paint over it like this. Try and go round and do one brush stroke rather than 5. But while I've got some, that's the most difficult bit done. So while I've got some paint in my brush, I'm just going to add a few bits onto the snow. The snow is not white, so the snow is going to be reflecting some of the colours we've got. And so I'm going to put little bits of blue here. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to happen. And a few more bits of blue here, and wash it out and wash it in clean water and stroke it over. I'm using quite a rough paper so I can get some nice dry brush effects. Now that's fine, doesn't bother me too much. It might bother me later, but it doesn't bother me too much at the moment. So at this stage we're going to dry what we've got and pause the video. Good, this is the moment when we're going to skip to a smaller brush if you want. I'm going to continue with my big brush, and I'm just going to put in a few details across the front. So here's some. Notice how even with my thick brush I can still get some fine lines. Farmer perhaps looks like he perhaps should repair his fence slightly, and it's a little bit dark, so I'm just going to dab a bit of it out. Okay, and the other thing I'm looking at that I don't like is these trees here. They're too green for winter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that upside down, and I'm going to make them a dirtier colour. They're just too spring-like, the colour for what we've got here. And even this one as well. It's full of life and it shouldn't be. Okay, that's a better colour scheme. And here we need to add a few very soft bits on the top of the roof, because there's snow on the roof, but the roof isn't going to be completely level. So we just add, don't overthink it, just add some bits on the roof. And then the last bit I'm going to show you is Toothbrush work. So you take a toothbrush, and the harder the toothbrush the better. This is probably one that you would never use to clean your teeth with. So you mix it up with your paint, and you might like to practice on a piece of scrap paper before you start. So look how I'm going to hold the toothbrush. So I'm right-handed, so I'm holding it in my right hand. With my left hand, I put the thumb on top of the toothbrush and my index finger underneath the toothbrush, and I pull away. So that's the effect I want to get. I'll show you that again. I'll choose a different colour this time. Hold it in your right hand, and thumb on top of the toothbrush, index finger underneath, and flick away from you. Good, so let's try that now on our painting. Notice I've used two different colours for this. So this is where I'm going to do a blue bit first. And at this stage I would keep some kitchen paper in your left hand, just in case there's too much of this and you want to dab it off quickly. So again, just gives a little bit of, just a bit more texture too. If you don't want it in your sky, I'm being very careful not to go in my sky. It's quite a good idea to cover over your sky with a piece of paper. And then I want the same thing, but I want a kind of dirty colour this time. So that's a bit too much. As with all special effects, don't go too wild. And let's assume these are some rocks here, so let's just add some more texture to our rocks. One last thing I want to show you. I just want to get a little bit of texture on the barn. So clean water, and we're going to remove some of this paint. I'm going to just a tiny little line I'm stroking down there. And can you see, maybe you can't see on the video, it's just added a little bit of texture on that end of the barn. So you've got sort of the planks on the end of the barn. Right, I think that's almost finished for now. So if you remember way back at the beginning, we did our frame, and I've actually painted over my frame. So if I now take my finishing frame, I can make it like that, or I can make it like this. So this is what I mean about having choices and deciding. Stand up, look at it from a distance and decide which, maybe I want that one. Yes, I think for me it looks better if it's further towards the right. So this is the end of this session, and please have a go, and if you want to send it to me, then we can discuss your composition. Have fun painting. Goodbye.